Tucker Carlson brings new information to light in the case of George Floyd's death and Derek Chauvin's involvement in that. We're going to cover that here today on Speechless. Cut for time. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Speechless Cut for Time. I'm your host, Kev Phares, 22-year-old conservative college student out of Central Illinois, host of Speechless on Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal. But I can't necessarily cover everything that I want to on my Sunday show from 3 to 5 p.m. And that does also air here. But that's why I bring you these Cut for Time segments so that I can get more in depth with some things. Speaking of which, I did cover part of this story on my Sunday show yesterday, but I wanted to give the full context of exactly what Tucker Carlson had to say in his expose of the new information regarding this case. And to make sure you don't miss a minute of anything that I have to cover on here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment what you think, and share it with your friends. Please, guys, and especially subscribe. I'm almost to 1,000. But let's get right on into it. So I'm going to cover what Tucker Carlson has brought to light, but I want to start off with what we already know, because the mainstream media, since this started coming out, since it started trending on Twitter, the mainstream media tried to say, oh, this is misinformation. This is misinformation. So we'll start off with what they claim is misinformation. So the AP News, Associated Press, says George Floyd, this is AP fact check, you can see it right up there. George Floyd's autopsy report is not new, does not say he died of an overdose. So a lot of people, when Tucker came out with this, brought an autopsy report from George Floyd, which is the Hennepin County autopsy report. They took a screenshot of the second page and were spreading it, saying that we knew that he did not die of a homicide. Now, here's the thing. So the only claim that says in this that is false, that this says is false, is that the autopsy report is new. They're right. It is not a new autopsy report. This is not information that is necessarily new. And then the only other thing that they claim is misinformation within this is that it says that he did not die of an overdose. It's right. The homicide, the homicide ruling was was claimed in this autopsy, and we're going to cover that here right now, because let's take a look at the autopsy. We're going to look at the main 3 pages because the rest of it is the description. So it's 20 pages long. We're going to look at the first 3 primarily because that is what is actually, the rest of it is all like medical speak of exactly what they did here. So when it says case title, it cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. So let's look at everything they found here. This was ultimately ruled as a homicide by the Hennepin County's autopsy report. But if we look at what they looked at here, we can see 46-year-old man who became unresponsive while being restrained by law enforcement officers. He received emergency medical care in the field and subsequently in the Hennepin Healthcare Emergency Department, but could not be resuscitated. When you look at blunt force injuries, you can read through all of these if you would like. Most of them, or actually all of them, basically represent relatively small injuries, cutaneous, which basically means of or relating to the skin. Some level of injury was reported, but not necessarily majorly significant. And you also have natural diseases. Let's take a look at these. Hypertensive heart disease and major heart disease, multifocal severe. That's severe right there. So he has severe heart disease and also a tumor in his left pelvis. Then you look at non-life-threatening injuries identified. So he has non-life-threatening injuries, and that's everything regarding his neck, his shoulders, posterior, no chest wall soft tissue. So all of these are listed as non-life-threatening, including his neck, all of his neck, his shoulders, his back, all of that. Then you look down here at toxicology. This is what people were heavily focusing on. Levels of fentanyl, norfentanyl, methamphetamine, and also THC. He also has cotinine, 4-ANPP, other things in there, but significantly high levels of drugs, life-threatening drugs, to be specific. So that's what a lot of people were focusing on. Then you get down here. He was also positive for COVID at the time. Well, it wasn't ruled a COVID death. That's an interesting point to go into. And then you can see again all of these others, other things in this toxicology report, or not just toxicology. The autopsy had to do with what exactly they did to come to all of these conclusions. You come down here and they look at the internal examination. Let's look at neck, because that's what everybody was so focused on, and head. You can see the soft tissues of the scalp are free of injury. You can see at neck, layer by layer dissection of the strap muscles of the neck disclose no areas of contusion or hemorrhage within the muscle. Basically, very minimal to no injury in his head or neck. Exactly. So even when you go to his respiratory system, the right and left lungs, the external surfaces of pink are only of anterior aspects, the deep red, purple in all other areas. Pulmonary is diffusely congested. And so he had congestion, which all of this would make sense when it comes to COVID. So we get into this. Did George Floyd die at the hands of Derek Chauvin? Is Derek Chauvin a murderer as he was tried and convicted for? But he still maintains his innocence to an extent. Let's look at what Tucker Carlson has to say and take a listen at the new evidence that he puts out in this.
Now that we know that it was not, in fact, a pandemic of the unvaccinated, now that we know that Ukraine is not actually winning the war against Russia, it could be time to revisit some of the other slogans we've been assured are true and ordered to repeat. Are they, in fact, true? Did, for example, a racist white cop actually murder a man called George Floyd, a civil rights leader?
A civil rights leader. And I think it's important to recognize what he's saying at the very beginning here, too. And I know I'm going to react to this. And so if you want to watch the whole thing uninterrupted, I will include that in the comments. I understand not everybody wants me chiming in, but he brings up just a valid point just in that first section, which is be a critical thinker. And a lot of us are. I know that already. But consider the alternatives. Even in the most wild of cases, there is a narrative out there, and we need to consider the alternative to that narrative. That's what he's trying to say here.
In Minneapolis on Memorial Day of 2020. Now, we've been told that happened, told it relentlessly for more than 3 years. So at this point, we've been told it so much that pretty much everybody seems to believe it. And because everyone does kind of believe it, a small group of people has been allowed to make massive changes to American society. They include, but are not limited to, decriminalizing stealing, defunding the police, adding a new federal holiday to the calendar called Juneteenth, the ceasing of hiring all white men in corporate America, and of course, significantly, they also sent a cop called Derek Chauvin to prison for more than 40 years. He would be the racist white devil who murdered George Floyd. But the question is, did he actually murder George Floyd? And the answer is, well, no, he didn't murder George Floyd. And we're not guessing about that. We know it conclusively, thanks to a new court case now underway in Hennepin County, Minnesota. The case was brought by a prosecutor there called Amy Sweezy. She's suing her boss. So the case is not actually about George Floyd or Derek Chauvin, but it tells you an awful lot about both of them. In her deposition, which you should read, Amy Sweezy describes a conversation that she had with the county medical examiner, Andrew Baker, right after George Floyd died. Quote, I called Dr. Baker early that morning to tell him about the case and to ask him if he would perform the autopsy on Mr. Floyd. Sweezy recalls all this under oath in the deposition. Quote, he called me later in the day on that Tuesday, and he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation. Oh. In other words, George Floyd, according to the official autopsy, was not murdered. He died instead of what we used to call natural causes, which in his case would include decades of drug use, as well as the fatal concentration of fentanyl that was in his system on his final day. So this was not a killing. It was yet another narcotics OD in a country that records more than 100,000 of them every year.
And so that speaks a little bit further, and I'm going to keep letting Tucker go, but that speaks even further to just the issue of the drug crisis we have in America. But he's already hit on so many topics. First off, there was no evidence to ever show that this was racially motivated. First off. Second, I would even argue, even without all of this, that there was not, because to be a murder charge, to prove murder, you have to prove intent. Legally, you have to prove intent. And I don't believe that there was ever conclusive data or a conclusive way to prove that Derek Chauvin had the intent to kill George Floyd. Now, that would make it so that based on the statute in Hennepin County, whether or not it's a manslaughter charge or in a civil case, you could still argue wrongful death and negligence, which I believe is part of what was argued by George Floyd's family. But again, not guilty of murder. I'm not coming in here and saying that Derek Chauvin is a saint. But what I am saying, and what Tucker, I believe, is also saying, I don't want to mischaracterize, but is that Derek Chauvin was arrested, tried, convicted for a crime that not only did he not commit, but he was done so because of a prevailing media narrative that pushed the idea that he was guilty until proven innocent, and there was no chance he was being proven innocent. He was a sacrificial lamb for the BLM mob to try to appease them after they committed at least 25 more deaths. There was at least 25 more deaths, not killings necessarily, but 25 more deaths as a result of their rioting and billions of dollars of damages to cities across the country. And so Derek Chauvin was supposed to be the sacrificial lamb for that. Let's see what else Tucker has to say.
The medical examiner clearly understood that and, in fact, articulated it. And Sweezy explains. He said to me, she recalls in the deposition, Amy, what happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on? And then he said, quote, this is the kind of case that ends careers. In other words, everyone lied about it from the very beginning. The people who knew the truth hid the truth and allowed the revolution to proceed. Now they've been exposed. Now we know the truth. What happens next? Well, they're going to ignore it. The Biden administration just issued a long purple statement celebrating George Floyd's birthday. He's a martyr, despite the fact we know that he was not murdered. And by the way, Derek Chauvin is still languishing in jail for the rest of his life. So how do we respond to this? How do we respond to the truth once we have it? Well, Vince Everett Ellison seemed like a good man to ask. He's the author of Crime, Inc. He joins us now. Vince, thanks so much for coming on. So as with so many other stories, the origin
thanks for having me, Tucker.
Of COVID, it's a blessing to have you. We now know what actually happened, but the question then is, what do you do with that knowledge? We know that the U.S. government, Tony Fauci, worked with the Chinese to create the virus that overturned the American economy, but like, what do we do with that knowledge? What do we do with the knowledge that George Floyd was not actually strangled to death by a cop?
See, and I'm excited to hear what this guy's answer is, but this is a question I'm sure that has been on a lot of our minds. There have been so many instances in which we are proven, and I've said this on my show multiple times, is I firmly believe that the government lies to us more than it tells the truth, or at least it hides the truth more than it tells it. And so the way I see it is what do we do? I feel like I've had that question so often, is it feels like we're in a hopeless society of which the best case scenario is we just have to put that behind us and hope we elect better people in the future. But what do we actually do? And I'm hoping this guy provides a good answer. I just think that was a great question and worth pointing out that we probably have all had that sentiment before.
We have to acknowledge the people that gave it to us and why. See, George Floyd is the Democratic Party's prototypical black man. These are the black men they are trying to create. So George Floyd has to be elevated. He has to be celebrated. He's perfect to them. He was poor. He was uneducated. He was a drug addict. He didn't have a job. He was down there begging and crying and asking the white people to not kill him. To a Democrat, to a white Democrat, this is the perfect black man. So he has to be elevated. Look, not a few days ago, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden celebrated hip hop music. They had a celebration of hip hop.
Hip hop culture is America's culture. It is a genre. It is music and melody and rhyme. And hip hop is also an ethos.
Can we also just point out, I don't know if this is what he's going to say, but just the extension of Kamala Harris continuing to speak to everybody like they're children, like they're kindergartners. Hip hop is a genre. It is American culture. It is beat and sound and music. No shit. No shit. Pardon my French. I'm not allowed to say that on the radio, but I'm not on the radio right now. So no shit, Kamala. Just an idiot.
A music genre that calls the black man the N word, calls women the W word and the B word, talks about misogyny, shooting police, smoking dope, selling dope, fighting, killing, acting a fool. They celebrated this genre. Why? Because this is how they see Black America. They see us the same way they see George Floyd. And they have to make more of us because everywhere they rule, John F. Kennedy stood in front of the Berlin Wall in the 60s and said, if you think that communism is great, let them come to Berlin. Well, if you think that the Democratic Party is great, let them come to Detroit. Let them come to Chicago. Let them come to St. Louis. Let them come to LA, Portland, Seattle, Memphis. Anywhere where they rule, you'll see George Floyd's all over the place. And they're proud of them. In Baltimore, Maryland, they spend $21,000 per child for every child up there inside the school district. Not one school is proficient in math, science, or reading, but they keep it going every year. Why? Because they're producing George Floyds.
But
And George Floyd's
wait,
vote for the Democrat Party.
But why would, so when most of us, you, me, I think all normal people look at George Floyd's life, you think this is a disaster. This guy never added anything. He took a lot in prison, at least 8 times. I mean, his life was a tragedy at best. Why would you want more people like that?
Because he votes for the Democrat Party. And then he teaches his children to vote for the Democrat Party. And then these white Democrats can feel superior to him. Yeah. He can be controlled by them. Just like, think about an old slave plantation, talk back in the day, how they wanted their slaves to act. Subservient, obedient, ignorant, doing what he was told, not asking any questions, having a slave mind, being dependent on them. This is how they want black men to be in America. This is how they want the whole black community to be. This is why it started in the civil rights movement when Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Green speech said, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Negro is still not free. He said 5 times in that speech that we were not free. It turned the Declaration of Independence on its head, because in our Declaration of Independence, it said that our freedom was an unalienable right given us by God. John Locke, in his second treatise of government, said that an unalienable right is a right given from God. It is irrevocable, non-transferable, and unsellable. The government cannot touch it. It supersedes law. It supersedes the Constitution. However, King said that we was coming to government and to the white man for our right to be free. Even at the end of the speech, he said, on some certain day, we'll be free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. He said in that speech, when will we be satisfied? He said, we will never be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's a fancy way of saying never. And so black people heard that speech and said that we were not free here in America. And we make our children recite that speech every single year on King's birthday. And they say in that speech, the Negro is still not free. George Floyd was a slave in his mind. And the civil rights movement caused him to be a slave in his mind. And today they're still marching 60 years later, telling black people, you're not free. Beg for reparations, beg for affirmative action, kill your children in the womb, cut off your child, you castrate your children, let drag queens come into school and shake their behinds in your children's faces, run God out of the public square. And then they end up like George Floyd. But the one thing they do consistently is they vote for the Democrat Party, and the places where George Floyd's live, they stay in absolute power.
That's a pretty dark explanation.
Yeah,
so you're
absolutely.
saying
That's what
the
I'm
Democratic
thinking.
Party as an organization intentionally degrades black people to keep them compliant and obedient.
Oh yes, in my book Crime Inc., I talk about one of the main things they do, like the mafia and organized crime. They humiliate black people. They demoralize them. It's a Marxist construct. They demoralize their people. They beat them down. They tell them that they're victims. Well, it was Martin Luther King Jr. that said, they tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, how can you pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you're bootless? He told us we were bootless. You have black preachers, and you've heard, about my iron triangle, the black preacher, the black politician, the black civil rights worker. They go into the black community. Consistently, you're a victim. You're oppressed. The country hates you. Well, see, I look at them and I say, I'm a black man, but I cannot be oppressed. You know why? Because I'm a child of God. I'm an heir of Jesus Christ. I cannot be a victim. Why? Because I'm an heir of Jesus Christ. I'm a child of God. I cannot be a victim. See, they tell these people to go against their religion and their basic ideology, because most black men say they're Christians, right? But then they walk around saying, I'm oppressed. I'm a victim. I'm afraid. 365 times in our Bible, they tell us to fear not. Yet they walk around saying they're afraid in the United States of America. LeBron James said he's afraid. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says he's afraid. Kaepernick said he's afraid. Well, I'm a black man in America, and I'm not afraid of a damn thing. I don't ask for permission in my own house. America is my home. So as they walk around here crying, talking about, I'm frightened, I'm afraid, I can't make it, please help me, I tell them they stink in my nostrils.
I haven't really come in that much to react much, because I feel like he's pretty much just saying everything I could say, but he says it even better. It sounds a lot like, it reminds me of Ty Smith. If anybody, you guys know Modern Renaissance Man Ty Smith on YouTube, good friend of mine. It sounds like him. What is there to be afraid of? If you are black in America and you firmly believe that the Democratic Party, when they tell you that you're oppressed and they're going to give you everything, no, they're never going to do that for a few reasons. One, because, well, then they lose their platform. If they were actually able to give you everything, when they even make, it's not just to black America, they do this, they pander to every minority group, they even pander to some white people and say, we're going to give you reparations, we're going to give you this. No, what they're going to do consistently is they will continue to tell you they'll give you that, but then when they don't, and they actually don't take significant actions they're going to tell you that it's Republicans' fault. It's Republicans' fault because Republicans are racist. They're awful people. They're trying to, they have no problem with police brutality or anything like that. They'll tell you these lies. They'll feed you these lies until you have some that start to wake up. And that's how you have people like Candace Owens, who came out and she has all of her books of the Democratic Party, like The Greatest Lie Ever Sold or something like that. And she's got The Greatest Lie Ever Sold is actually about George Floyd. I recommend everybody go check that one out. And just police brutality in general. And then you have people like this man who will come out and they'll try to expose people to the crap that the Democratic Party pushes that just panders and totally takes away any idea that somebody can bring themselves up by merit or just simply be a good human being. That no, any drug addiction in your community, any issues of crime, that's not your fault. That's not your fault. That's because you're oppressed. You're oppressed in this country, and we're going to try to be the saviors of you. That's what they promise. That's what they promise. That's exactly what this guy's saying, and he's saying it all the right ways. Let's let him finish out here too.
They're an affront to God. The flip side of white male intimidation during the civil rights was also black male cowardice. They laid down and let them beat them, slap them around, rape their wives and their children. Well, no, not me, never me. I'm a free man. I live in the United States of America. They say it's an honor to be that there's white supremacy and that white people have some type of privilege. Well, as I said before, it is a privilege to be white, but it's also a privilege to be black, and it's a privilege to be an American, and it's really a privilege to be a Christian in the United States of America, the greatest country on the face of this earth. And they're not going to make a George Floyd out of me. I stand up strong. I look them in the eye, and I say, I'm a free man. My freedom comes from God. It's an unalienable right given to me by him. You cannot touch it. And if you try it, I got two things that'll get you off of me: Jesus and my 38. Come try me out.
So the Democratic Party used BLM as a domestic militia in the last presidential cycle, 2020, to defeat Donald Trump. Do you expect something like that to happen again?
Well, you see how they use the same tactics as Iran. Iran has Hezbollah and Hamas as their militias. And the Democratic Party uses BLM and Antifa as theirs. Yep. Throwing the rock and hiding the hand. Of course they're going to do it. They've always done it. Even at the beginning, they used the Ku Klux Klan for the military ring. Now they're using BLM, they're using Antifa, they're using NAACP, and they're their suicide bombers. They're their shock troops. They're their brown shirts. They're their street soldiers. And they're going to go out there, and I guarantee you, Tucker, they're going to look over all the black-on-black violence. They're going to look over all the black men killing black men. They're going to look over all the snatching grabs and all the burning and all the fighting and looting and acting a fool. And they're going to find one crazy white cop that's going to do something to some crazy black man, and then they're going to try to burn this country down for it. That's their plan. That's their template. I hope America's ready for it because it's coming. And it always works for them. It always works because the press and everybody's just waiting. Oh, they're on the starting line just waiting for it. And as soon as they find that golden kill, watch them go crazy with it. BLM is going to start getting their money from the Democrat Party because that's who they get it from. The same way that Hamas gets their money from Iran. BLM gets their money from the Democrat Party. And BLM does not stand for Black Lives Matter. It stands for burn, loot, and murder. And that's what we should call them from now on.
Vince Everett Ellison, Bible in a 38. It's great to see you today. Thank you very much.
Vince Everett Ellison, everybody. Like I said, if you want to watch that full interview unedited, I will be putting it on my in the comment section of this video or the description. But just to wrap up the amazing rant he just went on. Absolutely, the Democratic Party uses and panders to minorities Ty Smith talks about it all the time. If you want somebody who's better equipped to have that conversation with you, go check out Modern Renaissance Man Ty Smith on YouTube. Does an amazing job of it. But there's that. There's also, and this is something I've said on my show before, Tucker's even talked about it before, is wait till 2024. We've seen what they've been willing to do in 2020. In 2016, they pushed the Russia lie. The election was stolen by Russia. In 2020, not only was there different instances of rampant election laws changed, and issues there that YouTube might censor me for if I even start going into. We also had the entire BLM riots in George Floyd. We had COVID. If that's what they are willing to do with everything in the past to keep people in line and to push people towards the Democratic Party, imagine what they will do in 2024. Be ready, everybody. Be ready. Be ready. I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever you think is like the worst case scenario, imagine like worse than that, and that's what could happen. Because that's kind of what happened in 2020. But everybody, I don't know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Maybe either, and I'm trying to be hopeful and everything. I want to be hopeful, and there are ways to be hopeful. But just be ready for 2024 and make sure we get out to vote, because that's the real thing. Is they can't see on an election if we get more people to vote than they even plan for, then we can win. I guarantee you. Everybody, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment what you think, and share it with your friends. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless America. And until next time, you've been watching Speechless. Cut for time.